All right, welcome to our Ask Me Anything with Sharon Hewitt Rawlette. Sharon has a PhD in philosophy from New York University and wrote her dissertation at the Ecole Normale Supérieure in Paris. She was the Florence Levy Kay Fellow in ethics at Brandeis University before launching her career as an independent writer and researcher. She writes for both popular and scholarly audiences on the topics of consciousness, anomalous experience, ethics, and spirituality. Sharon, it's so great to have you with us today.
Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to hear how our conversation evolves today.
Wonderful. Now, for those of you that are joining us, again, if you have a question for Sharon, please throw it in the chat if you can, and digitally raise your hand if you'd like to ask it yourself. And when you do ask your question, try to recite it as you wrote it in the chat. It just helps save a lot of time, we found over the years. So thank you so much, and please, anybody here, throw your questions in the chat. We need them. So with that, I'll start off. Sharon, how did you get interested in what are thought of as anomalous experiences?
Well, I came to it through personal experience, as I imagine most of the people in this group did. My personal experiences were not through any UFO contact experiences. I really haven't had any experiences that I would say are obviously paranormal in any way. But what I have had are really strong coincidences or synchronicities, to the point where they were like at that borderline of, is this just ordinary? It seems obvious that there's something else going on, but it's not like the laws of physics are being broken. It's just like it's so meaningful and so in such an improbable way that, like, no, there is something else going on here. So I first started having those experiences about 12 years ago, I guess now. I actually realized once I started having some of these really strong experiences that I had had others in the past that I had just kind of not paid attention to. Like they were just sort of like these one-off things and just were kind of in the back of my mind. And then as I had started to have these really blatant synchronicities, I started to realize that they were part of a pattern that had been in my life in the past. So I wanted to know what it was behind these events, like what because at the time when this started, I was an atheist. I had grown up religious, but at college in my very early 20s, I had just said, no, I don't think any of that's true. I don't see any evidence that there's anything beyond the physical world. Science seems to make really good sense of what I experience. And so I really didn't think there was anything else until I started having these experiences. And then I wanted to know, okay, well, if these things are happening that seem to be sort of speaking directly to the thoughts that I'm having, the needs or the desires that I have, how is that possible? What's happening in the world that maybe science doesn't understand, that is the origin of these experiences? And that set me off on the quest to write my enormous book on synchronicities, which is it's like 600 pages, because I really wanted, it's because it talks about so much more than just coincidence and synchronicity, because I really wanted to sort of see those experiences against the backdrop of all of these other experiences, more blatantly paranormal, that people have. I realized that, this stuff does happen to people. It may not have happened to me, but it does happen to a lot of other people, and that their experiences and your experiences could help me better understand what was going on in my life, that it really was all connected somehow. So that coincidence book is really trying to tie together a lot of these different paranormal experiences and then situate the nature of coincidences in the middle of all of that. So
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. It's an incredible book. I was thinking about having it in picking it for book club later this year. We don't normally have books as monolithic as this, in terms of, as you call it, a doorstop. But I would absolutely love to, because it's just so, it has such incredible depth to it. We are, however, going to be covering Deep Weird in June for book club. Deep Weird, edited by Jack Hunter, who is an anthropologist. He likes to call himself a para-anthropologist sometimes, or I don't know if he still likes to be called that. He used to be. Deep Weird, The Varieties of High Strangeness Experience. This just came out in January, and I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's like the best book in the field that's come out this year so far. How did you get involved in this book?
I actually wrote a review for the Journal of Scientific Exploration of one of Jack's previous books, his Greening the Paranormal. And so I guess he found out about me because I wrote that review of his book and then asked me to do this one. So
Oh,
yeah.
very, very cool. That's awesome. Yeah, it's a brilliant, brilliant essay that kind of opens the book in a way on synchronicities. It's absolutely fascinating. Let's see. Let's go over here again. For anybody joining us, please feel free to throw your questions for Sharon in the chat. Feel free to break through. I'm not here to just kind of do a podcast interview. We really love having your questions in here. Let's see. I'll go to. All right. As I mentioned before, you wrote your dissertation in Paris. How was that experience for you? And did you notice any differences or nuances in how the paranormal, anomalous experiences, anomalous studies in general are regarded in France as opposed to, say, here in the States?
Interesting. I've never had anybody ask me this. Nobody
Yes.
really seems to ask me about the France and stuff, but this is great. Um, so I will say that at the time that I was living in France for a few years, I didn't know anything about this. So when I was at the Ecole Normale, I was not studying this. I was studying very straightforward analytic philosophy. But actually, it was while I was at the very tail end of my time in France that I discovered parapsychology. And so I actually discovered it through a French book that came out that month. There's this French parapsychologist now named Bertrand Meilleux. And he's written several popular books, but that also have this sort of scholarly texture to it. And in any case, I happened upon his book through a series of synchronicities that let me know that this was a book that I needed to read, and indeed it turned out to be. And that he really introduced me to this whole field of parapsychology. So I came into it from a French perspective, I guess, at that time. So thinking about like differences between the way it's pursued in English speaking countries and the way it's done there, I feel like the sort of the general approach is pretty similar, and the sort of diversity of people who are coming at it from a very academic perspective versus people who are coming at it from a very experiential, sort of narrative perspective. That's there. And of course, you've got people that are very firmly entrenched in a sort of spiritual, sometimes new age perspective there. And so there's that same diversity. I know when I talk to French researchers that they say, oh, we're like 20 years behind, what you're doing in the States. In some ways, it's true that it's harder for French speakers who don't also speak and read English to have access to all of the material that we have. We're so privileged to be able to speak the language, which is the primary language that a lot of this research is done in. So there is that like translational delay for people who don't have the English language ability. But at the same time, I feel like the major ideas and the major discoveries, I don't know if discovery is the right word, because I feel like I feel like each of us personally, we get to a point where we discover something, but as far as like the field of parapsychology discovering things as a whole, it doesn't seem like, it seems like more we uncover that, well, no, parapsychologists have actually known about this for a really long time. It's more like continuing to just draw these connections between all these things that we have known about and try to figure out how to understand them better. But in any case, so I feel like the sort of the central ideas are there in both of these cultures. If anything, the French researchers that I know maybe take a more sociological,
Hmm. Mhm.
even sometimes literary perspective. There's more of a context of the humanities and social science there, whereas maybe the English-speaking countries are a little bit more oriented toward the laboratory sciences. But both of those things exist in both countries. It's maybe just a question of the balance or the emphasis.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And not to be stereotypical, but looking at the field from kind of a meta perspective from French culture would make a lot of sense, or French writers. That's funny.
Yeah. I mean, the French culture as a whole puts a lot more emphasis on the humanities and
Yeah.
scholarship and
So let's see. Okay, I'll bounce around to one other question before we move to a few members' questions here. What do you think of the idea that there's maybe one or more than one typically unseen layers or dimensions of reality overlapping ours? And do you think that these typically, if there are these typically unseen layers, do you think that they have any correlation with what are perceived as synchronicities?
I do think that there are other layers, probably way more than we even imagine that there are. We're probably aware of the ones that are closest to us, that our consciousness is able to understand in some minimal way.
Mhm.
But I imagine there are probably uh, layers or dimensions of reality that are so far removed from the way that our minds work and the way that the way that we interact with the physical world, that we just could, like, I mean, we could be here in the middle of them and we wouldn't even be aware of them because they're just so different. And in fact, that may be the case. So yes, I do think that there are these other layers, and I think for me at least, some of the most convincing evidence for that comes from near-death experiences, and also from people's memories of existing before they were born, and just this, that not only that their consciousness was still there when their physical body wasn't there, but that they did think in completely different ways. They perceived in completely different ways. Time worked in different ways, and so
Mhm.
and they have so much trouble explaining that. I mean, how do you explain something that works so differently to somebody who's never experienced it? But I think that's the primary reason. I think that has to exist. And then, of course, when you have other experiences that happen to contact type experiences and things, and out of body experiences and different things that happen to us, even while our body is intact, but we're somehow distracted from it or detached from it for some period of time. I was trying to think the second part of your question. Yeah, it was about the connection to synchronicity.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that there are so many different ways that synchronicity is connected to that, because so one sort of simple way of thinking about it might be that if you have this other dimension in which reality is more unified than our reality, or it's unified in different ways. So like in our dimension, me sitting here in Virginia and somebody, over in France, we're very far away from each other. It takes a lot of energy and effort, although less than it used to, for us to communicate. But it takes inventing technologies in order to make that happen. Whereas there might be another dimension in which actually those two people are right next to each other, and so they can communicate easily without any particular effort or intervention. So one thing that I like to think about is there a dimension or a kind of space that's organized by meaning? So things that have very similar meanings to each other are very close together. They're very easy to access one from the next. And then things that are very different in meaning are harder to get to. And it's sort of like if you're thinking about like mapping the human brain and the way that our sort of physical consciousness works, we seem to have those kinds of maps in our brain. Our brain associates very quickly between ideas that are similar to each other and not so much between ideas that are very different. It's hard even to remember sometimes things that but that are so different from what you're currently thinking about. Your memory has to be jogged by some other experience. So I think we have this idea of a meaning space, and that might not be just something that is in our individual minds, but it might be something that's in some shared space that we could all be part of, and that we might all be in right now in our different places. And so though two people can be very far away as far as their physical body, if they're thinking about very similar things, or that are caring about very similar things, then they may be influencing each other through causality in this other dimension, this other realm. So synchronicities might occur because actually these events that we think are very far apart in space or time are actually very close in the meaning realm, and so they tend to produce each other because of that closeness in meaning.
Wow, that's so great. I've never thought of like the corollary between of what could be termed as meaning space, like you're talking about, and kind of the possibilities of kind of telepathic resonance, or the different aspects of that. I hadn't thought about the corollary there. That's so brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah. Let's see, why don't we move to Brian Lee. It's great to have you here, Brian, by the way. What's your question for Sharon? Yeah.
Thanks for everyone coming. Enjoyed hearing you at the New York event, Sharon, very much. So I have a baby steps question. My first question I put in chat was, do you have or do you suggest a kind of litmus test for when a coincidence is, oh heck, that was nothing, versus trying to frame it into a relationship with something else? In other words, how do we figure out if it has meaning? Do you have a cool process for that?
Well, I think that there are two major processes that I use myself, at least, and would maybe suggest to other people. So I think there's sort of a more objective test that you can perform, and then a subjective test, and then it's probably important to do both of them. So the objective one would be just asking, how improbable is this event? So usually, or oftentimes, the coincidences that we experience are somehow a coincidence between an inner event, some thought or feeling that we have, and something that we observe in the outside world. So actually, I've written some pretty detailed a pretty detailed academic paper about how you can look at these probabilities. But very simply, I think we have to look at, okay, so what's the level of meaning that this event has for me? And what's the chance that that there could have been something else that happened that would have that same level of significance for me? So, because often when these things happen to us, we'll think about that particular event that happened, well, it was really improbable that, somebody would have, said that particular sentence, or we would have seen that particular image on television or something. But we forget about all the other things that we maybe were thinking or feeling at the same time that we didn't see images of, or we didn't hear, people say. So it's important to think about your sort of total state of mind and think about the potential that your environment at that time had to produce these experiences. And I think all of us tend to have an intuitive feel for this to some extent. Like, we seem to actually be able to say, whoa, that I did not expect that. We have this surprise factor where our mind automatically is able to say, no, that, that shouldn't have happened. So we can look at it in that kind of objective way and sort of gauge, could this sort of thing have happened by chance or not, and get a feel for it that way. And some events that we experience definitely cannot be explained by chance. They're just, you get to, one in several billion probability that something that significant would have happened to the person at that time. So I definitely don't think that they can all be explained away. But at the same time, there are, I think, significant coincidences that happen to us that are not going to be improbable at that scale. And that if we insist that events have to be that, borderline paranormal in order to really be coming from, some intelligence that we should pay attention to, then I think we're going to miss a lot of really important events in our lives. And so that's why I think that the subjective test is also important. You have to pay attention to how it makes you feel and the subjective sense of the significance that you feel, because it could be, it could be something that somebody, even who's in the same room with you, and experiences it, they're just like, yeah, whatever, like, you're just baking this, like, it's just chance. But you feel in your soul that there is a deep significance to what has just happened. Like, it changes something in your mind or in your heart in an important way. And I think we have to really pay attention to that. I mean, maybe that's kind of a sign from the meaning space that we were talking about before. Like, it's telling you, it's interesting because this question of whether they're coming from outside us or not, I also think is a really ambiguous question. Even though, a coincidence could be like super improbable, but that doesn't mean that you're not creating it yourself in some way, because I think our minds are very active in the external world. So it's not like we don't have the ability to create those events for ourselves. So we have to be aware that just because it's very improbable and it's, showing up in an objective fashion doesn't mean that it is necessarily an independent intelligence. It could just be a reflection of what we are thinking or feeling. But that can be very significant. It can be very important for us to know what we are thinking or feeling. And so whether it's physically improbable or not, when our attention is suddenly drawn to it as being this, numinous event in our environment, I think that is telling us something important, the fact that we subjectively feel that meaningfulness. And I want to tell a little story. So let me figure out which one I'm going to tell, because let me tell a story about when I left academia. Okay, so I had decided that I wanted to get out of doing academic philosophy. I just wanted to be an independent researcher and writer with all the freedom that entailed. And I had been out for maybe 5 or 6 months, but then I had some financial difficulties and different things, and I thought, man, I mean, maybe I should have like applied for another academic job. And I decided to go onto, there's like one website for philosophers where all the jobs are posted for the next academic year. So I decided that I would go on there and I would see what jobs had been posted that year. It was actually after the deadline for when the jobs should be posted. So I didn't, expect to find any jobs that I could apply for, but I thought I'll go and see what was there. And if there wasn't anything that I would have wanted, then I will know that I made the right decision to leave academia. So I go on the website and I discover that there is a job in my specialty in my home state, so just like a couple of hours from where I grew up, and actually in a part of the state of Virginia that I think is the most beautiful part, up in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And I thought, well, this, if I was going to apply for a job, like this is a pretty good one. And then I see that this particular job, the deadline is much later than all of the other jobs that have already closed. I actually have 2 weeks until the deadline. And so like, okay, I guess like this is meant to be. I need to apply for this job. So I scurry around and like get new letters of recommendation and, update my resume and all this stuff. I'm pulling everything together and I need to send it to my alma mater for them to like add their letters of recommendation and send it on to this university. And and another coincidence, I just realized that I happen to be traveling to the city where my alma mater is. I can just like take it in and hand it to them in the office. I don't even have to mail it. Like, okay, again, like meant to be. Well, I get there to New York and I can't bring myself to go to the university and give them the packet of stuff. Like I just keep putting it off. And it's finally the last morning that I'm in the city and I'm sitting like at a little apartment at a table, staring out the window. And this is in downtown in New York. So the streets are really small. So I'm staring out the window and like, 15 feet away, there's like this other office building there. And these people are sitting in this office and I'm watching them like sit at their desks and I'm imagining like what it will be like to go back to academia and work in that environment. And I just have this terrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. I'm like, I just can't do that. I just can't do it. And I decided at that moment, I was like, I'm not going to turn in that packet. I like put it away and I like went out, to enjoy my last day in New York. I was like, I'm not taking it, not turning it in. I don't care what the universe is telling me about this job. I'm not doing it. So I go about my day as a really good day, feel very good about the decision that I have made. And that evening, I'm out with a friend of mine and we're walking around the same area of Manhattan. And he's an architectural journalist, so he starts pointing out some different buildings to me. And actually, one thing I forgot to say. So that evening, I had been telling him about some coincidence experiences that I had been having, which all involved the number 33, which was just a very significant and spiritual number for me at the time. So I told him about this, and then we're walking around and he's showing me some different buildings that are significant downtown. And he points to this one and tells me that Philip Johnson designed it. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, I think that's the building that's like across from the window where I was sitting this morning. And I asked him, like, is that across from here? And he's like, yes, that's the same building. And then he says that the address of the building is 33 Maiden Lane. And we looked at the sort of plaque on the building. I was like, yeah, 33. So I was trying to figure out afterward, like, what was going on here, right? So why, if I wasn't supposed to take that job, why was this perfect job offered to me? Why did everything line up so well if that wasn't my path? And what I realized afterward was that what it did is it gave me the perfect opportunity. It gave me the perfect job in the perfect place. I mean, as far as academia was concerned, this would be the perfect job. And if I didn't want that job, then that meant I had made the right decision to leave. So it was a situation that reflected back to me what I was thinking about, and that crystallized the feelings that I had. So I don't know if some independent intelligence laid that out for me, or if somehow in meaning space that it, my own mind was able to create it. But ultimately it doesn't matter, because ultimately what the coincidence was able to do was to help me understand myself better and help me to make a better choice for myself. And that's one of the main things that I try to convey to people about coincidence and synchronicity, is that sometimes it can seem like an outside message, but you always have to interpret that message. You always have to, because even if, somebody was standing in front of you giving you a message, even if you're talking to an extraterrestrial intelligence or an interdimensional intelligence of some kind, you have to decide whether that's an intelligence that you can trust or not, whether what they're saying is valuable or not to you or to the people around you. And so ultimately, it always comes back to you listening to your own heart and soul and mind, and thinking through all of the implications and feeling through all of those implications. But ultimately, it's up to you. And so the origin of these events, I think, is less important than what we choose to do with them. So that was a very long answer, but hopefully that's
No,
in some
so
way.
generous. Thank you so much. And thank you, Brian, for the question. That's so great. And it's great to hear kind of, oh, I don't know where that was. Oh, it's great to hear that kind of, we don't often think about the issue of kind of, or it doesn't come up very often, the idea of kind of the inauthentic narrator with regard to like discernment when it comes to synchronicities, as opposed to, say, non-human intelligence or something like that. So I appreciate you bringing that up. That's awesome. Let's go to, let's see, what did I say? Kate next, then Sherry, then Evan, then J. Paul, and then I've got a question from Carol Aubin. So let's go to Kate Chesse first.
Hi, Sharon.
Okay.
Hi.
Yeah, great to see you.
My question's maybe a good segue into what you were just talking about. How did you get involved in the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies? And second half of it is, how could someone else get involved, even as a volunteer, if not as an employee? And sorry, one more thing, what you do there.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I got involved with BIX through their essay contest that they had a year and a half ago for the best essay, or the best essay on the best evidence for survival after death. And since I had already done a substantial amount of research on that, I decided to put together an essay for that, and won one of the runner-up prizes. They had like 29 different prizes. So I was part of that. And then a few months after those prizes were given out, Robert Bigelow, who runs BIX, contacted me and asked me if I would be willing to be part of the board. It's an advisory board. There's 10 of us that meet periodically, really just to kind of brainstorm about things and to give Robert feedback, because he mostly runs the organization, but we give him feedback on his thoughts and from our different areas of expertise. So that's generally what I do. Right now, what BIX is focusing on is what they're calling the Challenge Grant Program. So ultimately, they want to actually fund a lot more researchers and give out a lot of money to people who are doing research on survival of death. This is really just the first step in that. They had a call for grant proposals. I think the deadline was February 1st. People to do a pretty small scale mostly experimental work dealing with mediums. And Mr. Bigelow is very interested in what sort of wisdom may come through mediums from the other side, sort of general wisdom that would be useful to humanity as a whole. So currently, he and his staff are reviewing those applications, and we'll make decisions about those, I think, in April or May. But right now, it's really at the beginning stages. So I think that Mr. Bigelow, he's trying to figure out where he wants to take this. He has his own interests that are steering it to some degree, but I think he's really looking for what the major focus of. I mean, obviously, a lot of it is on survival, but as most of you are probably aware, he also has had interest in contact phenomena and things that happened at the Skinwalker Ranch and different things like that. So that may factor into some degree as well. I'm not sure. As far as somebody wanting to get involved, you can email me. I would be happy to pass on your interest. So my email address, it's on my website on my About page, but I'll just tell you briefly, it is sharon.rawlette, and that's RAWLETTE @gmail.com. And yeah, feel free to just shoot me an email and let me know what kinds of things you would be most interested in doing, and I will let them know. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Sharon. And thank you, Kate. Absolutely wonderful. Let's see. Okay, so who did I say was next? Okay, Sherry, and then Evan. Sherry?
Okay, I'm going to do what you said not to do, Jay, because I had a question that was like, what about the other shoe in your story about having two, I think, like left shoes, and then you found the right shoe. And I'm like, why didn't you get two? Okay, that's a dumb question. But earlier, because you mentioned something that actually was really quite interesting to me, you mentioned like a dimension in which that is maybe more governed by meaning rather than time or space or whatever. And to me, that perfectly describes the dream state. And I was just wondering if you think that, or if you believe or sense that maybe we access another dimension while we're dreaming. I mean, I've heard things in channeled text that say this, and I kind of believe it. It's just always hard to explain, and I wonder if you've ever.
So I do think we do access other realms while we're dreaming. And different people do it to different degrees, and we do it, more or less at different times. Some people, well, we may even do it unconsciously. I was going to say, some people seem to very rarely dream at all, and and when they dream, it's meaningless. But they may be dreaming and may not remember it. I think we do a lot of unconscious work and maybe unconscious traveling while we're asleep. But I do think, yeah, we're in touch with other ways of receiving information and other ways of processing information too when we're asleep. I'm not a very psychic person when I'm awake, but when I do get precognitive information or telepathic information, it comes to me in dreams. It comes to me when I'm asleep. I guess because my analytic mind gets turned off and I'm not analyzing and criticizing everything that comes into my mind, and my mind is just very relaxed, and so these things can filter in where they couldn't before. But I think there are some people who, well, I know that there are some people who just have, it's like when they're asleep, there's this just complete opening to this other dimension. And one person I'm thinking about, I don't know if you know the work of Andrew Paquette, Paquette. he's written this wonderful book called Dreamer, 20 Years of Psychic Dreams, something like that. And he actually started out as a total skeptic about anything paranormal. And he would just like tell his wife his dreams. And his wife was like, I think you're dreaming about things that have happened after you dreamt them. I think you're having precognitive dreams. And he was like, oh no. But he started writing down his dreams to prove to his wife that they weren't accurate precognitively. And what he discovered is that in fact they were, and some of them really uncannily. So in his book, he talks about all these precognitive dreams, but what's even more interesting, I think, is that he discovers as he gets practiced at remembering his dreams that there's actually this place that he's going to in his dreams where there's like a consistent group of people. There are various like consistent environments that they interact in. They seem to be doing things. Like one of the things he finds himself doing is helping the spirits of people who've recently passed over, and like helping them figure out that they're dead and where they need to go. And sometimes in his dreams, he will interact with these people who've just passed over. And then in waking life, he will discover who this person was, or somebody that, was connected to them. Or he has dreams where he's actually having conversations with other people who are still alive, but dream like he does and are in this space. And then he's come to meet them in waking life, and they can have conversations about what happened over there. Although it seems like most of them don't remember quite as much detail as he does. But it's also really interesting that that the parts of his dreams that he's able to remember don't seem to be the entire dream. It's like he will his memory will begin when things are already happening, and he's already done some things and he's already in this context, but he can't remember sort of the beginning of how he got there and all of that. So his is a really interesting book to check out. And there are other people, like Robert Waggoner, who has written a book called Lucid Dreaming, that has not so many sort of like psychopompic experiences, but just being able to have these out-of-body experiences or telepathic connections with people in dreams. So I absolutely think that there's objectively real stuff that's happening in dreams, just in a different place, in a place built of consciousness or meaning, or what have you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Deeply appreciated. And thank you for the question, Sherry. Let's see. Then it was Evan. And Evan, it was wonderful to see a littler Milton in the frame earlier. It's always awesome to see your kids. Evan, and then J. Paul. And then I've got a question from Carol Aubin. Evan?
Yes. Yeah, the little one, attention is limited, but we got a little visit. So, sorry, let me pull up my question here just so I don't get too off topic. So I heard you speak for the first time in New York at the Inquiry to the Anomalous conference in December. Thank you, Jay, and others for organizing that. It was a great chat, and introduced me to your work for the first time, which was really enlightening. And one of the things that really struck me was part of your discussion and how we need a new framework to discuss reality that doesn't exclude materialism, but allows for something more, something that you've kind of identified as the acausal connecting principle. Also in your book, you mentioned that, in another plug for others to get the book. Yes. And so that's really, I pretty firmly believe that's kind of the forefront of where we sort of need to go as a kind of as a culture. But how do you see engaging with the kind of purely secular, purely physicalist ideologies without having to sort of rely on people having their own unique experiences, almost like you did. Like, so you said you were a kind of a
Materialist.
yeah, but basically materials, and then you had these experiences that caused you to sort of flip. How do you foresee engaging with others without forcing a kind of, you know, waiting, I guess, on like paranormal experiences to touch others?
Right. So actually right now I'm working on a book for mainstream philosophy that it's primarily about the mind-body problem. So it's about consciousness, and it's about connecting consciousness to meaning, and consciousness as a way in which meaning and value become part of the objective world. Because right now in the mainstream academic culture, but at least the sort of scientific based academic culture, there is this idea that value is always something that we sort of add. Like, it just depends on your perspective, it depends on your opinion or your belief whether something is good or bad. You know, morals are just, they're subjective. And what I'm trying to do in that book is actually build on some of the work that I did when I was in academia before, to show how consciousness is actually, even though it's in a lot of cases, it's a private phenomenon, you know, other people can't, you know, directly see what's going on inside of our minds, even though it's private in a sense, that doesn't make it less real. That doesn't make it less a building block of the world that we live in. And I think one of the major reasons that we've written off meaning and value as somehow not being objective is that we haven't understood the way that consciousness is part of the objective world. So we don't see how these two things mesh, the mind and the body, or the physical and the non-physical mesh. And so we just think, well, the physical must be the real stuff, and then the other stuff is just kind of this illusion that we get because of the way we think about things. So what I'm trying to do in this book is show that there's actually a way of understanding value and meaning as being objective parts of the world because of the way that they're objective parts of consciousness, and because more and more, at least in analytic philosophy, there are philosophers who are understanding that consciousness is something very real that is not reducible to the physical properties of the world. There's this extra layer. There really is a mystery about it that the methods of investigation that we have in science are not able to get at entirely. There's something else going on there that we have to investigate in a different way, even if that's just the method of, you know, introspecting on our own experience. So I'm trying to pick up on the ways that mainstream philosophy is changing and taking consciousness more seriously, and say, you know, here we can start answering some of these questions about meaning and value. And I'm kind of in the book like sneaking in some not sneaking in, but like trying to talk about the way that we even think about the way that the mind interacts with the physical world, and that we've had it all wrong. And there are ways that we need to really shift our way of thinking about what reality is and how reality operates in order to understand the relationship of the mind to the body. And if we do that, I actually think that it's going to open a space for these paranormal experiences as well. So I think there's actually a trajectory that we're on in mainstream academia that that will open up that discussion. I think that this, the mind-body problem is, or what people call the hard problem of consciousness, that's a big part of it. But also, if we look at what's happening, well, with everything that's happening with the investigation of UFOs and the recognition of UFOs on a national level now, but also the way that the psychedelics are becoming so much more present and accepted within our culture, I think all of those different things together are going to foster a lot more conversation within mainstream culture and within mainstream academic culture of these weirder experiences, because there's going to be a place for them. I think we can create a paradigm where suddenly we don't have to discard them because they will disrupt everything that we know about the world. Rather, we can create this paradigm where it's like, oh, well, actually, I mean, maybe those things that we've thought couldn't be real, maybe they actually could, because this kind of model would explain them. That's what I'm hoping for anyway.
Thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you, Evan. Next, we have J. Paul with a question about time.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just being introduced to your work today. And so this is not new to me, but and I haven't read your book, but I would definitely will go out and get it now and read that. But I was curious if you're aware of the work of Chris J. Hardy. She is a French philosopher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've read some of her work.
Yeah, The Sacred Network and the pre-subquantum level. I mean, she gets into this whole area, this whole field of, which leads me, the question is that of time and timing. What is the role of time and timing in this whole sense of synchronicities and these there is no coincidence in that sense. But then too, in that context, I have difficulty, and I'm trying to understand domain, dimension, and realms. These words are used in different ways, but I think you're right. I really like the way that you're headed with your research and finding this. But I've noticed too, you haven't, or do you use the word the psyche, the reality of the psyche? I mean, this is deep Jungian, Pauli, they get into that whole psychoid level. So but again, you may cover this in your book. I don't know yet. But so the question,
in some ways, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, just the whole sense of time and timing, and when these events happen, and how they, and as well, of course, then the dreaming imagery, all the archetypal dream imagery that comes up in that whole realm. So, but I'm very delighted to meet you like this, and we'll look to read more. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. With timing, I mean, I think it's definitely crucial to a synchronicity. I mean, it's built into the name, synchronous, meaning something that's happening at the same time. Of course, when we experience these coincidences, often they're not, the two events that we're seeing as connected aren't necessarily simultaneous. They could happen, with some amount of time in between them. But there's at least enough proximity and time where the proximity itself seems like it's highly improbable. One of the things that I talked about in the talk that I gave in New York in December was the difficulty of figuring out in these synchronistic cases what caused what. So, was it, if you're thinking about something and then, an event happens in the external world, well, did your thinking about it cause the event then to happen? Or, was the event already going to happen and that's what made you think about it? There in parapsychology, there's always this question of distinguishing precognition from psychokinesis, right? And so some parapsychologists want to say, well, precognition is impossible. It's impossible to know the future. So really everything that looks like you're knowing the future is really, you're just affecting the future. You're creating the future in a psychic way. And it seems like there's not a clear philosophical way to distinguish or to to experimentally or empirically distinguish which of the things is causing the other one, if we think that causation back in time is possible. I can't hear you because you're muted.
And then there's the whole possibility of retrocausality and time loops.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and time loops, I think, are another one of these really weird things where like you'll have a dream of something, and then you'll do something as a result of that dream that then causes the dream to be realized.
Yes.
So if you hadn't had the dream, the thing wouldn't have happened, but it seems like the thing happening is what caused your dream. So ultimately, I think that we have to take a non-local perspective on this, that somehow the events are happening in a non-time dimension, and they're being sort of imprinted all at once on this dimension, or they're poking up in different places in this dimension, but all at once, and that what is connecting those different events is the meaning that they're producing.
Exactly. Yeah. The meaning
Yeah.
and value. I think you're right on there.
Yeah.
I look forward to hearing more about that,
Yeah.
that deep the semantic field.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. But there was another part to your question.
Well, it's the terminology that we're using in, paranormal, or the dimensions, or the realms, or the domains, or the fields. Sometimes this all gets mixed together, and I'd like to, I'm in the third dimension, but I also work in the fourth and the fifth. And how many dimensions are there, and what domains and what realms and things like that? I'm just, those words and terms get thrown around a lot, and it'd be good to have a good nomenclature and distinguish.
Although I'm not sure if there's a fixed geography to this
Right.
stuff,
Yeah.
because I think our minds can actually create new dimensions.
Mhm.
So we can constantly be creating new spaces. I mean, I think every time we dream, if we're dreaming about a new environment, it's like we've suddenly that's 3-dimensional, well, 4-dimensional really, because we're dreaming in time. This 4-dimensional space suddenly opens up, and it's not in any of the spaces that we already know about. It's just this space in our consciousness. So I don't know if we'll really be able to map all of those things, because I'm not sure that they exist outside of the causal connections that are happening in consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just coming to a typology of dimensions in that sense, but then also the role of psyche and soul in all of this. And I'm talking too much. I see Jay's raising.
Sorry, man. No, I love your questions, but we got to come back to them.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll come back around, but
All right.
glad to meet you. Look forward to more later.
All
Yeah,
right.
good to meet you too.
Sorry, Jay Paul. I love your questions, but I it's my role. I got to try to be fair to everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay, so next we have a question, and partially this is because Sharon only has about 15-20 more minutes, and so I'm trying to get through to everybody. Thank you so much, Jay Paul. I really appreciate your questions. Carol asks, well, actually, Carol's not in frame right now, so maybe I'll skip hers for right now, and then, oh, she is here. Okay, great. She can hear. Cool. So kind of a big picture question. So who is trying to give us these answers? I mean, I guess that's the best way of putting Carol's question. Is it the universe trying to give us the answer? Is it God, the voice in the light? Like, what's your take on who's behind this whole situation, or what is?
Yeah. Well, I think I have at least 10 different answers in my book. So my book on coincidences is called the Source and Significance of Coincidences. And the first 3/4 of the book is 10 different chapters, each one about a possible different source. So like chance, God, angels, spirit guides, the deceased, children who have yet to be born that are communicating with us, ourselves, the person experiencing them, other living people that are able to communicate to us through these experiences, negative entities of some sort that may wish us ill in some way, also perhaps some sort of natural law principle that is communicating the natural structure of the world to us, or the universe as a whole. So I try to lay out evidence for all of these different sources, and I actually think that all of them account for some coincidences or paranormal events. I think there are all different kinds of centers of intelligence, centers of consciousness in this universe, and they all have the ability to communicate with us at different times in a paranormal or synchronistic way. So I don't think there's one specific answer. Now, that being said, I do think that there is ultimately all of our consciousnesses are connected in some way. So there's not necessarily a complete separation between you and me, or between us and entities in other dimensions or on other planes. And maybe not any ultimate separation between us and whatever sort of divine energy or intelligence may exist. So I'm saying that because I want to emphasize, I think that there is some measure of coordination in what's happening. It's not just millions of different minds like doing crazy things. Although sometimes I think that that is going on. And if different experiences seem contradictory, that's because they're coming from different minds that are wanting different things and pursuing different goals. But there is also a dimension to these experiences that seems more systematic, that seems more methodical. And I am not at the point where I feel like I could say in any kind of authoritative way, or even a way that I would be sure that I would agree with, in 5 years, what that is. Or, I mean, my own sense from my own experiences is that there is a benevolent intelligence somehow organizing them. And I say that because, at least in my life, it does seem like those experiences are taking me to better and better places, that they're helping me to grow, they're helping me to learn things, they're helping me to help other people. But that's not to say that that's the case for any experiences that people have, because there are also people who have paranormal encounters that are very not only scary, but that they don't seem able to handle long term, and that seem to be deleterious to them and cause harm. So I think it is really important that we don't automatically trust everything that happens to us, everything that is suggested to us, but that we have this discernment, like I was talking about earlier. And I think our intention in experiencing these things and in puzzling through them and figuring out what to do with them, I think our intention has a lot to do with what they become in our lives. So I have hope that there is a greater benevolent intelligence, but I also think that we have to do our part to make it benevolent, in a sense. Like if we are part of that intelligence somehow, if we're connected to it, then I think we have a part in making sure that the ultimate organization of the world is leading it to a better place. And that's probably the best I can say about that right now.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Carol. Yeah, I'm reminded a little bit about the classic John Keel question of, if there is that organizing intelligence, I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, if there is an organizing intelligence to the universe, whether it needs to be sane or not. Yeah. Let's see. With that, here I'll move to. I've got a question from Tim that he would like me to ask, and then one from Jim. Question. It seems like when intense, impactful synchronicities occur in adulthood, often in kind of a domino effect, a wave of synchronistic memories from childhood can come rushing in, which can reframe a person's entire reality. Can you comment on the kind of growth that can occur in a person when this happens and positive ways to navigate that growth? It's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of connects to some of what I was saying before about that when I had my first really powerful coincidence experiences, I realized that I'd had some other coincidences that happened before that I just hadn't really paid attention to. But I'll say that did seem to be leading me along the path that those later coincidences seem to. They all seemed to be kind of pushing me in a certain direction even before I was aware of it. So I assume that you said Tim, who was asking this question, that Tim probably has had this happen. So I don't know what kind of specific, childhood experiences he had, but I would ask, one of my questions would be, does there seem to be a sort of thread of destiny weaving these things together? Are there particular themes? Are there particular places? Are there particular people who were involved in these different events? And what do you see each of those events as revealing to you about yourself? Because it's so much of that of the journey is figuring out who we are and who we're becoming and who we want to become. So yeah, I think, yeah, maybe that, I hope that's helpful. But I will say I don't know if I have examples that I can think of, particularly about people remembering these clusters of synchronicity in childhood. And I would love to hear more from Tim if he would be interested in emailing me about his experiences. I'd love to know.
Oh, that's a great response. Thank you, Sharon. And not to speak for Tim, but he's got quite a lot to share.
That would be great.
Cool. Let's see. And then next we've got Jim. Jim, what you got?
Hey. Are waking synchronic experiences and dream experiences, precog, etc., an intervention into our senses by something else, or are we stumbling into something else ourselves? Or do you think it's a combination of both?
So I'm sort of taking your question as like, are they intentionally trying to reveal this to us, or have we just kind of accidentally made a connection with something that wasn't really intended for us?
Or how about, are we initiating it, or is something else initiating it, or both?
I think there has to be a sense in which it's both. Everything in the universe seems to be relational. So you can't have a causal interaction between two things unless they're both the right sort of thing to have that interaction. Like you can't have a gravitational attraction between two things unless they both have mass, right? Or you can't have an electromagnetic interaction unless you have two things that have some kind of charge or electromagnetic energy. So I think that's true in the realm of consciousness too, that there has to be some kind of I'm thinking synchrony, but there's a better word for it. Like kind of being on the same wavelength, or a way in which the consciousness of these two things matches up in some sense that allows them to connect. And that's not to say, that you can only have experiences with something that's, very much like you, because that's not at all the case. But there's got to be that sort of meeting point that opens the door, I think. So whether it's that, we're just interested in, exploration and adventuring in the realm of consciousness. So maybe, we take DMT or something, and that's what opens the door. Or it's a particular trauma maybe that we've experienced that we're trying to work through, and somehow that connects to some other consciousness or some archetype. But I think there is always something on both ends that wants that connection to occur, consciously or unconsciously.
Thank you so much, Sharon. And thank you, Jim. Deeply appreciated. Let's see. And with that, I think we've got room for maybe one or two more questions. But Sharon has to leave in here in about 5 minutes. So sorry, I'm thinking out loud here. All right, so I've got one over here. I've got like a million tabs open right now. This is absolutely insane. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Sharon. This has been wonderful, and so dense and so generous of you. Thank you so much. You taught ethics at Brandeis, as I recall, right? What are the most relevant areas for you for ethics with regard to anomalous experiences and experiencers?
Well, I think it's hard for me to answer this question, because I feel like the questions that I've been most concerned with when I've done ethics in academia are dealing with the ethical questions that people are grappling with, particularly in from a materialist physicalist perspective. So it's really this question of, well, no, ethics can be real, and they can really matter, and meaning can be real. And I feel like for people who experience these, for experiencers of all types, I think there's a deep, we know, that there are other realms that are real. That value is real, I think, because you could feel it so viscerally, especially because a lot of these experiences, whether they're paranormal or whether they're just really strong synchronicities, a lot of them can come with a sense of fear, even like or excitement. Like, they're very strong emotions that are associated with them. And so I don't think anybody who's had the experience is tempted to say, well, it doesn't matter, like it's not important. So the message that I sort of have for people in those two areas, I feel like is somewhat different. But if I had to bring them together, I think that I would come back to something I said earlier, which is that I think we have to remember that the ultimate ethical arbiter, the ultimate ethical authority is within us. Okay, especially when you first start out in having anomalous experiences, it can be tempting to think that you're being sort of allowed into this other realm where things are, I don't know how to put it exactly, like you're being allowed into this realm where things have a definite reality, like and they have their own authority. Like, for instance, a lot of people in the environment that I'm part of are like evangelical Christians. So when they have a strong paranormal experience, they immediately think, oh, God is talking to me through this. God is telling me this thing. So there's this sense of this external authority that's telling them to do something or telling them what's important in their life. we tend to interpret whatever experience we have within the framework that's available to us. So, I mean, that's completely understandable. But I think the more you get into the experiences and the weirder and stranger they get, the more you realize that they're not as cut and dry as that. Nobody really has a framework that has all of the answers. You're not going to ever get to a point where you can completely predict or control the phenomenon. It doesn't work that way at all. So there's not a set of answers that is outside of you. And even if someone with strong paranormal powers claims to have all of the answers, ultimately you have to decide whether to allow that person to influence your life and your decisions or not. And you make that decision based on your own understanding of what is good and valuable in life. So even though I agree that ethics is real and value is real, but it's real it's not something outside of us. It's still something inside of us that we are present within and that we are in the act of creating. And we shouldn't give up our authority and our involvement in that, because we're the only place that value can be truly recognized is from that inner place. And I think a lot of these coincidences and other experiences come to us not to get us to a specific, physical place or, to get us to do something even in, in some interdimensional reality, but really just to ultimately connect us back to that source of authority within ourselves, to help us understand who we are at a deeper level. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sharon. I think that's an absolutely wonderful note to end on today. Thank you so much, Sharon. This has been this has been a huge pleasure. So great. And thanks to everyone here for joining us today, for bringing your wonderful questions and your attention to the AMA today. This has been so great. Thanks again, Sharon.
Want to add,
yeah, sure.
that I would love to hear from people if they have, especially coincidence or synchronicity stories, but I'm interested in paranormal phenomena more generally. But please feel free to email me. Like I said, my contact information is on my about page on my website. So send me an email. I'd love to chat.
Great, wonderful. And for those joining us later through the magic of recorded video technology, Sharon's email address again is sharon.rawlette@gmail.com. And again, this video is only for the Experiencer Group community. Thanks again so much to all of you, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your wonderful spring Saturday. And hope to see you soon. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.